Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the 2004 film Going Under. And this is another exploration of a female dominant, male submissive kinky relationship, like our previous video, Love and Leashes. Although this one is quite different in many ways. It's an American independent film. And we're going to be talking, let me introduce myself. My name is Peter Tupper. I'm a BDSM educator, teacher, organizer, historian. I've written the book, A Lover's Pinch, A Cultural History of Sadomasochism, which came out in 2018. I blog at historyofbdsm.com, and I'm working on a new nonfiction book about kink in mainstream media. And my colleague can introduce herself.
I am TammyJo Eckhart, and I have been a BDSM activist and educator. I'm a published author of multiple genres, and I've been the head of a polykinky household now for almost 30 years.
Okay. And now, Going Under, I first saw when I was in New York in 2005 at the CineKink Film Festival. And that was before I'd really studied kink in mainstream media in depth, and I liked it quite a lot then. I thought it was one of the more, I'm going to say, sensitive treatments of kink relationships, and especially of female dominant, male submissive relationships I've seen in mainstream media. And I think I'm sort of like, I'm likely to recommend it to people who want to see mainstream media films about BDSM. What did you think of it, TammyJo?
I mean, I would agree. I think people should see it. It is worth seeing. I think it just really left me sad and really annoyed at these characters. I want to preface by saying that I do not have any close friends that are pro-doms. So everything I know about the pro-dom community has been through various other kink communities where I've met people and heard them speak on panels or articles I've read or books I've read. But I just, when I was watching this, and I watched it 3 times, and this is the first time I've seen it after you recommended it, I just kept thinking, he should know better. He should know better. And what is her problem? and I kept feeling like the movie as a movie was failing to give me the information that I need to have empathy for her, which is a huge part of identifying with a movie for me. I need to have empathy with at least one of the main characters. And I just kept finding him annoying. And so I couldn't get any empathy for him. So I think that it was beautifully done at times, and I think it raised some interesting questions, but I just, well, I think as we talk through these scenes and stuff that you laid out, I'll reveal what it was particularly that I just found it wasn't a turn on. It didn't make me happy. It didn't really make me all that interested in like the first movie we saw or other movies I've seen, but it didn't make me angry either. Sometimes movies of a femdom nature make me really angry, and this didn't do that. It was just like,
like Love and Leashes, the movie we saw earlier, that was structured as a romance and with a, well, maybe not happily ever after, but at least happily for now ending. And this is more of a drama which ends with the 2 leads separated. Let me give a quick summary of the film. It's about the relationship between Suzanne, who is a pro-dom, and her client, Peter, not this Peter, but another Peter. So what sets the movie off is when Suzanne tells Peter, who's been a repeat client of hers, and they've come closer. She says that she's quitting the business, but she wants to see him outside of the dungeon in a, I don't know what you might call the non-BDSM world. And Peter is a married therapist who is seeing the Suzanne with perhaps not with the acceptance, if not approval, of his wife. And as we get to see their relationship progress, we go into their backgrounds. We see the kind of their pasts. We see their difficulties in trying to have a relationship outside the sort of the hermetically sealed bubble of the dungeon relationship, the dungeon setting. And I don't think we might as well just go ahead and say there will be spoilers here. That it ends with them basically separated and not seeing each other. Now one thing I should talk about here is that Suzanne is a pro-dom, and by far professional female dominants outnumber by far non-professional female dominance in mainstream media, at least. You're far more likely to see a pro-dominatrix than you are to see a female dominant who's not in the commercial side of things. So that's not quite the same thing, as there's a big difference between commercial and non-commercial, like Love and Leashes, which we talked about last time. That in both cases, that was a non-commercial relationship. Here, it's a commercial relationship at the start that becomes somewhat more, but doesn't quite make it to a relationship outside of it. And I'm a little disappointed that they never actually got to play outside of the dungeon. We never saw them interact that way. Like we like the opening is what I imagine, like the opening, I imagine you recognize as the mural in the Villa of the Mysteries in Pompeii. Yeah. And the first thing when we see them, we hear them and talking in voiceover to each other about, he's talking about how I've searched and searched for you and gotten to meet, finally found you. And she's saying is that I like my job. I take care of people. There are rules. And now I like that scene because I thought it captured the sense of intimacy and connection you can have in a good scene with somebody. I was annoyed by the fact that when we saw her doing the needle piercing on him, she wasn't wearing gloves. I mean, like, I guess theoretically they could be fluid bonded, but given that she's a pro dom, she's seeing other clients, and he's married. To me, that was a bit annoying. I mean, like, I would have much preferred for her to put on gloves before that. What did you think of that opening?
I was worried at first that we weren't going to get back to those images, but they're important on two levels, the images from Pompeii. The one is that she seems to be using them for inspiration for her art. I believe she is first and foremost an artist.
Yeah.
And if she could make a living as an artist, she wouldn't be doing the pro-dom stuff. I think she has a very negative perception of what she is as a pro-dom and the feelings that it stirs up in her. And but then he gives her this book that she's used to make the images from. And so, like, he's learned some things about her. And I would say, given the images that we see, he's probably interpreting this as like a femdom situation. And we could argue for hours about what's going on in those images in Pompeii.
Yeah. There's no consensus about the meaning.
Yeah. And I think that's why he's given it to her, thinking it will appeal to her on that level. And it was a little bit of a mislead, because I thought maybe their relationship was going to be more highly ritualistic or have pseudo-religious overtones to it, and it really doesn't. There are scenes in the dungeon which are mostly through flashbacks, and it's not entirely clear what chronological order we're seeing the scenes in, because some of the scenes they seem to be more connected, and some of them they seem to be earlier in the relationship, but they're not in the linear order.
Yeah.
I thought those were really well shot and really well done in terms of showing both people and their faces, and trying to stir up like a sense of what are these people feeling and can you feel it as an audience member. Yeah, this, and and the whole piercing thing, that's an indication, I think, of his development of feelings towards hers, because I know later we have their very first scene because we see him going through a checklist of what he wants, and then he picks her out of the photo album, and they have a little conversation about what he likes, and she asks him if he done piercings, and he says, that's the one thing I haven't done because needles scare me.
Yeah.
And so then I think later we're supposed to assume this is months, if not a couple years later, and that's like the level of trust he's feeling towards her. Yeah, so that's how I like the opening, that we're at the end of their professional relationship, and then we keep going back. It was just,
yeah.
I guess part of me wanted like a year, like what year or month was on there's like a track.
So sort of in the middle of the movie, we get a flashback to their first meeting when they're both using pseudonyms. And they actually have a negotiation. And that's actually another thing that's kind of rare to see in mainstream media, which is people actually sitting and talking about their kink experience, what's safe and not safe for them. And so there's not the usual male gaze look at Suzanne. Like she's, I think we see Peter we see him nude, frontally nude. We see him in a more vulnerable position. And so the camera doesn't sort of like linger on her as you might in some other depictions of women in a pro-dom position. I don't think we even see any nudity of her until the very end, and that's just brief. So I think we get a good look. There's definitely a lot of scenes focusing on Peter nude or in a vulnerable position.
Yeah, we do, however, see her using her body and her clothes with him, and we see her with one other client.
Yeah.
Like there's a point where she's looking at the book where he's given her, and she's clearly bending over on purpose to show him her back in that dress, and he's just he glances at it, but he's more interested in how she's reacting to the book. And so she's very used to putting on this show when she's with her clients, and so like the way she moves her body and the clothing she wears, she's very conscious of that, I think. And I would argue she's very conscious of that throughout the movie. Anyway, we'll probably get to that later.
Yeah. So this is the scene where she says, "I'm quitting the business," and then in the next sentence to him, she says, well, first he's aghast. I guess he's like terrified at the thought of never seeing her. And then she says she wants to meet with him in private. And he's overjoyed at that idea. So that there's this abrupt move back and forth between the two. Now, if I remember correctly, that we start to go into, I believe that soon after that, we find out about Peter talking with his wife. And I don't remember the exact sequence of events in the film. I know that there's various topics I wanted to touch on, but I know that we see him like having a little domestic scene with his wife, and then he brings up the idea that Suzanne, the pro dom I've been seeing, wants to meet and meet personally. And the impression I got was that she knows that he does this and she accepts it, but she's really not happy about it. It's almost like he's not asking her for permission in this scene. That was my take, that he definitely wants her. He's saying, I'm gonna do this and I'm not really gonna ask you for permission. And that was a bit rough to see, that he she was not happy about it, and basically just she had to bear it.
So when I put that together and the other scenes of those two together, what I picked up on was more, this is an understanding they've developed.
Yeah.
And it actually has, I think it has to do with two things. In that first scene we see them, when she comes, he goes to, and he like starts to get up, and I think it's to get her coffee. And she's like, no, you don't have to do that. And he looks disappointed. And so I think she has rejected what would be like his submissive overtones or undertones attempts. Like maybe she's just not interested or whatever. And so this is sort of the thing they've come up with. He makes his own money. He can go and do this. He has these professional relationships. And I think they have one of those open relationships where they don't share the details. But then later near the end of the movie, when we see them, I believe he's up where she's been spending the summer. She's a writer. Yeah. And he's visiting her, and they have this conversation. Yeah. And she says, like, you're so private. And he kind of like poo-poos it. And she goes, no, you don't share things with anyone. And he's like, well, I don't think people would understand. She's like, not even me. And to me, that seems like he has chosen to not really approach his wife to even see if this would be something that she's wanted. And I think maybe that might be what hurts her, is that he goes and he shares this part of himself with these pro-doms, but he won't do it. And maybe it's because she's rejecting these little overtures that could be seen as signs of submission or service, but she may not realize that that's what that is if he's never really talked about it with her, which I was just like, dude, aren't you a therapist? Shouldn't you know?
Yeah. So if I understand you correctly, he's emotionally expressive with Suzanne as a pro-dom in a way he never is with his wife.
Yeah, that's what I got out of that conversation, is that he's holding something back, and he interpreted as her comment, like, you're private, as from the rest of the world. And she comes back like, well, even me, and so I think it's that she feels he's holding this part back. And so that's how I interpret it anyway, is that because if it really hurt her that he was spending money on pro-doms, I think they would have had a smackdown fight at some point about this.
Well, I mean, she did, I believe at the ending, she did say, you hurt me. And he says, I know, and I'm sorry. So it is interesting to know how their relationship works on that side. We don't give a lot of information about how it works.
Yeah, they seem pretty independent, both of them. I mean, she goes off for like 3-4 months, by herself to write. And
I mean, maybe it's just, I got the impression they've been married at least long enough to have a late teens child. So maybe it's just their marriage has just gotten stale. Maybe it's not clear. Something that reminds me of that, I noticed that when Peter goes to meet Suzanne, he's very nervous. He's kind of twitchy. He's always looking up over the shoulder, like he fears somebody's spying on him. And that may be an interesting point, that even that this side of himself, the submissive side, the side that he shares with Suzanne, he's ashamed of it. Like, he doesn't want people to know about it, because we know he's a working therapist. He works in this practice. He has clients. We see scenes of him talking with different clients and getting them to open up to him. But he also, that may be, it's like, he's very closeted about it. And that's why, it's not like he's going to go out on a date and be seen. He's nervous about being seen in public with Suzanne.
Yeah. I was confused by his job, because the building he walks into, it says that it's services for adolescents. And yet the only clients we see him with are adults, and I'm like, they're not the same thing.
That was odd.
So I was like, is that like does he have like a part-time private practice? But that should have been made clear. I think he is. I mean, their relationship outside was weird, because
Peter and Suzanne,
as you rightly mentioned, she's the one who says, like, I'm quitting. We could see each other outside, But when the flashbacks, we see that he's been the one in the flashbacks when they're playing in the dungeon, kind of pushing the envelope, trying to get more information from her, sharing more stuff about her life, doing a lot of touching her, which just kind of like freaked me a little bit, because I'm like, most of the pro doms I've heard from or read things from, they're not really into the you touch me thing. Especially I believe this was take place in the United States.
Yeah.
That could be really considered crossing that line, which can get you in trouble with the police. And he is constantly pushing that. And of course, she lets him keep pushing it, because every time she says no, he stops. There's no non-consent here going on. I think she just, I don't know if she as a person, it has very clear boundaries for herself. And I think that's why she likes the pro scene, is in that space. Here are the rules. There's rules of the dungeon and then rules she has, but she keeps letting those rules kind of be pushed. And I wasn't really sure why she suggested they see each other, because she, most of the time, she does not really act like she wants to see him. You know, she's constantly saying things like, I can't get over how we met. She tosses the age difference at him at the end. She's constantly like giving information and pulling back. I think she's very conflicted.
Yeah, well, I mean, that seems to be all her relationships, because she's living with this woman, Miko, or Miko.
Yeah, Miko.
And there's this sort of push-pull there. When Suzanne meets with Juno, who was her manager in the Prodom dungeon, there's also this sort of push-pull. And like, it's almost like, you know, she comes in saying, I'm still quit, but she shows up to say, I quit. And like, you know, she asks if people are still asking for her. So it's almost, I feel like her boundaries are not stable. She's kind of wants to have it both ways. She kind of I think she wants to be wanted, to be desired, but not possessed.
Yeah. Yeah. And we don't get a lot about her background, except the story about, I guess it was her first sexual experience with a boy in high school.
Yeah.
And then he told everybody. But I kept thinking about that, going like, I had real difficulty believing that was her first sexual experience. I do not have difficulty believing it was her first consensual sexual experience, but I kept wondering if something else had maybe happened to her before, because yes, it's painful when people start going around and claiming you're the school slut and everything, but a lot of this seems to be more core level personality stuff going on with her. And then there's the stuff with her mom that didn't make a lot of sense. And I say this as someone who had a very difficult relationship with her mom. That stuff starts early. That stuff doesn't start when you're in high school. That starts super early. And her mom was just like, I'm like, interactions with her mom, I'm like, I would have killed had a mom like this. Yeah, I'm like, I don't know what your problem is with your mom. Either give us more director, or don't tell me this is a problematic mother-daughter relationship, because I've been there and I'm not seeing that. I'm just, you know, seeing a daughter who wants to be in control, really, like you just said. Yeah, her relationship with her girlfriend just felt weird too. Like, I never, and I don't know if this is the problem with the actress or with how they did the character, I never got the feeling that she wanted to be intimate with anyone. Like, when she and her girlfriend are having sex, there's like nothing, like nothing in her eyes, nothing in her words, nothing, which is why her girlfriend's like, you're not enjoying this. I'm like, well, that's 100% true. And I kept getting that feeling. Like, there were rare glimpses when she and Peter were in the dungeon, in that pro client space, where she looked like she was having some fun, but then quickly the mask would come down. And she even says that like 3 weeks before she decided to quit, she realized she was really enjoying humiliating a client, and that scared her. And I'm like, you know,
I think that's a key point right there, because like when she's telling Peter about this, she's telling Peter about this other client, about how, I think the problem is that she's, she talks about, right from the beginning, she talks about how she likes my work, there are rules. And I think it's like any sense of what she's almost frightened of is any sense of her own emotional involvement, whether positive or negative. So, she has no problems with playing the role, with humiliating this guy and whatever. She has no problems with that. But when she actually starts to feel anger, contempt, the desire to humiliate, that's when she starts feeling a problem. It's like, I'm not detached anymore. I have actual feelings. And I think that's the same problem with Peter, except here she feels some kind of connection to him. She feels, so having any feelings about her clients to her is a problem. And it's all about, and that she feels, so that's probably what prompted her to quit, or at least quit for the moment. And I think is that this ties into something I've been thinking about a lot, because I was reading a book by Danielle Linderman, Dominatrix, which is about pro-doms.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about various sort of ways pro-doms use to sort of explain their job, their position in society, how to explain, like, and the most common one is caretaker. They very often talk about the sense that I'm helping these men, I'm helping them express their emotions and things like that. And so it's like it reckons, instead of being this monstrous mercenary, they're just, no, I'm a caretaker. I'm like a healing professional. And in some cases, I've looked at a lot of portrayals of pro-doms in TV and film, and that's very common for pro-doms in media to say that they are like a therapist or psychiatrist with their clients. And in fact, Lady Heather on the CSI TV series, played by Belinda Clark, she actually quits being a pro-dom and becomes a therapist. So I think is that, and that's an interesting, because Peter is also an actual therapist, but the thing is that they're not therapists. They don't have oversights. They don't have, they're not supposed to be, boundaries about what they're trying to do. And so I think is that it's like the sense of that she feels that she's not able to keep that distance she needs. And I think it's a lot about distance. It's like that, the body worship scene when he's kissing up her leg, and he's like, okay, can I go this far? Can I go this far? Can I go this far? And she'll stop, and she'll say stop, and says, no, go back there. So I think it's like, for her, she wants the power to set boundaries and to change them when she feels like it. But I also think she wants the power of not feeling, of not having, she wants like that one-sided adoration towards her, but not to be possessed or controlled.
Yeah.
And having any strong feelings is getting in the way, is breaking through her detachment, her distance.
Yeah. And I think that's a problem, because what I see from Peter as the character is he wants that connection. He wants someone he can share these things that are private, which he's struggling to even share with his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And he can't read her because she keeps changing. Are they going to have sex? Are they not going to have sex? She'll say one thing and then 20 seconds later do something else, or a minute later, or a session or two later do something else. It's confusing. I imagine it's very confusing to him. But it was confusing to me as the watcher, because I'm like, woman, figure your stuff out. You have this job where you're supposed to position in a position of control and power, and you literally could hurt someone, possibly kill someone with some of the things you might be doing. You need to figure your stuff out. And she says at one point, he shouldn't ask her something because she doesn't need him as a therapist. She has one. And I'm like, I don't think you do. I'm just like, I would call bullshit on that. If I was there with you, I'd say that is bullshit. You do not, or you have a crap therapist because you have a lot of stuff you need to be working through.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that annoyed me. Whereas the woman who runs the dungeon, she seems to understand her a lot better. She's like, they think they're getting close to you and they're not. Yeah. And that's a good thing. You do this job really well.
Juno says it's like you create the feeling of intimacy. And then she amends it and says fake intimacy, but intimacy nonetheless.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what Suzanne is trying to do inadvertently. She wants them to feel intimate, but she wants to be above it and in control. And actually having feelings would take away her control.
Yeah. But I also got the sense that sometimes she wants to be closer to Peter, but she just can't. She doesn't know how. Like I have a feeling she didn't know how to do that with her girlfriend, which, and the Juno, the madam, says like, I'm surprised you have a girlfriend. I thought you'd have a boyfriend. And so that kind of led me to wonder, is that playing into the stereotype? Because there's this stereotype where the pro-dom is in their real life lesbian. That's really common, especially in mass media portrayals of like, they do this with men. They have to be paid to do this with men, but by choice or by their natural desire, they're with other women. Though, again, I didn't see much desire on Suzanne's part. This is rare moments.
She was very frustrating. Like, didn't like Juno call her, what did she call her? Called her contrary or?
Yeah.
It's like Juno seems to be aware that she's deeply conflicted and sort of playing this will I, won't I game all the time. And, she says it like, Juno calls her out and says, you could have just said no over the phone, but no, you came out here and met me. And you're asking about whether people ask for me.
Yeah.
Now, in the middle part of the movie, we see Peter and Suzanne both have scenes with other people. We see Peter go to Paddles in New York City, shot on location. And he has a scene with a woman there, Mistress Terry.
So was that Paddles?
Yeah, that was Paddles.
It doesn't look anything like I remember Paddles looking like. It seemed really small.
I don't know if they expanded it into maybe like this was shot. I don't know. Maybe they expanded it in different places, or
maybe this is just like one little part then, because the Paddles we went to, didn't we go to Paddles, or did we go to Hellfire?
But we went to Hellfire and the Vault, but I don't think we went to Paddles.
Okay. Because I was all three, but that was in the 90s. So I was like, what is this little this little hole in the wall place? Okay.
Yeah. And I remember it's the part with the bar and the booth seats there. Yeah. So that was interesting because it showed him that, I guess this is like, has he ever done this before and like seek people outside the commercial pro-dom world? Maybe it's that like it's he's worried about secrecy, so like this is like this could be the first time he's been to see people out in the public scene, and that's something he hasn't done before. So he seemed to, I don't know, he didn't seem to have the same sort of passionate connection he had when he was playing with Suzanne. He was very, he liked it, but I don't know, is that there's no mystery to Mistress Terry in the way that there is with Suzanne. She was too, or he seemed ultimately unsatisfied with that. What was your read on that moment?
Well, he didn't give Terry the same information that he gave Suzanne. So when we see the flashback to their very first scene, he's filled out this form, but then he decides he wants to talk. And I think the most important thing he tells her is that I don't deal with pain as well as I used to, but that's not the important thing for me. It's to be touched where the pain has been or will be administered. And he never tells Terry that. And I
Yeah.
got the real sense that if he had, she might have played a little differently, because I think at the end she's like, hey, if you're ever here, Peter, I'd like to, play with you again. He's just like, and walks away. And I'm just like, wow, dude, this is a person you could have had an actual real life relationship with.
Yeah.
And you just refused to give her information.
Yeah.
And, and he didn't last very long, to be really blunt about it. That
Well,
was like only
yeah,
a
that
few
could be like
minutes.
that could be a a cinematic convention, is that things take, much less time than they do in reality. Um, you know, so yes, why didn't he open up to Terry in the same way he did to Suzanne? Is there something different about Terry that he didn't like? Or
I mean, I don't know. I mean, he's the one who approached her.
yeah.
Um, I she seemed friendly to me. She seemed like a real person to me who could be interested in this. I was a little surprised that she seemed to be there on her own. I was like, that's pretty ballsy, being a woman on your own going to a kink club. But hey, maybe things changed in the decades since I was in kink clubs. That I mean, that could be a really scary situation to be a solo woman there. But she seems very much in control and capable, but yet, she's like, what do you like? She's asking him all the right questions and setting up the safe word and things like that. But he's just, I don't know, he just doesn't feel comfortable. And it made me wonder, maybe he's doing this to see if he can connect with someone.
Yeah.
But I think by this time he's developed, now this is my perception, I believe that both Peter and Suzanne have built up fantasies about each other, and they keep wanting each other to fulfill that fantasy they have in their head. And the problem is that neither of them are maybe capable of matching that fantasy. Him, because he's so terrified of being his true self in any sort of normal situation, he seems to be mostly able to do it in this pro relationship. And then her, just because she, I don't think, can figure out what she likes or why she likes it, or if it's okay to like it. And yeah, I thought, I thought it was really telling, though, that Terry asks Peter what he likes. He never reciprocates. He never says, well, what do you like? He just says, what can I do for you?
Yeah.
And then she's like, okay, we'll go over, take your clothes off, we'll have a scene, because that's how she's interpreting what he wants. But she's like, what are you into? He doesn't say, well, what are you into? Maybe she assumes, since he saw her up there doing a flogging, that that's what he's interested in. But I don't think that matches what we see him tell Mistress Diana, who's Susan, when he's like, I want to be touched where I'm going to be. Because when you're flogging someone, you're actually at a distance, to get back to that issue of distance again. Now you can run your hand over where you're going to strike someone, and you can, of course, touch them after you've hit them, but we don't see that happen, probably because he didn't tell her.
Yeah.
And she's more focused on form, and and that's SM and DS are not the same thing. They can overlap, but they're not the same thing. And I think they were having an MS scene that was devoid really of any DS.
Yeah, there was like, when we see Suzanne and Peter playing, they're very face to face. She's, they're quite close. They're often in the same frame together. We see like him do, we see her doing needles on him. Well, we don't actually see it, but it's off the edge of the frame, but it's strongly implied. And we see like him, doing body worship on her. So it's more face to face, and there's an element of distance there. So, I mean, obviously that's the first time Peter and Terry have played, and probably the last. So I think that the first time we see Suzanne and Peter together, they've played together many times, and so they've gotten to know each other a bit. And like, Suzanne says, when they first meet and they're using pseudonyms, she says, needles are one of my favorite things, and she says, they make me want to pass out. But when we see them later or chronologically, he's taking needles and enjoying them quite a bit from her. So yeah, I think you're right when you said that he's experimenting. He's seeing if he can feel the same way with this other person that he would feel with Suzanne, and he doesn't.
Yeah. But the experiment is flawed, because if he really wanted to see, he would have given her the same information.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's, yeah, I was kind of like, I really was thinking, well, that's what I want to see. I want to see Terry.
Yeah.
I want to see a movie about Terry. Like, why is she going to this club alone? What is she looking for? Because, I mean, there has to be a reason that she's going to do this.
Yeah.
And she seems to, at least what she's projecting is that she feels safe. She feels confident in this place. So does she know someone who works there? Could she maybe work there part-time? I mean, we literally don't know that much about her, but I was like, you're more interesting to me than Suzanne. And I've only seen you for 5 minutes, because there's more like emotion I'm getting from your body language and your voice and stuff.
She doesn't, I guess it's like Suzanne is always a little guarded, always a little, and Terry's just kind of just out there, you know, this is me, take what you know, this is what I'm giving, and you can take it or not. So now let's talk about the other scene where Suzanne, she says she's quit, but Juno, her manager, former manager, says there's this client who will pay you like 3 months worth of living expenses to do a scene. And initially Suzanne refuses, but later on she takes the job. She takes the train down to Philadelphia from New York. It was Philadelphia, right?
I think so. Yeah.
And she goes,
and that's right after her girlfriend breaks up with her.
Oh yeah.
Because Peter keeps calling, and the thing we see her is listening to this phone call he's left, and she's angry, and then she's on that train.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an important part of what then happens in that scenario.
Yeah, so she goes down and she meets Walter. You know, they're at another, I guess it's another dungeon that they're just renting a room in or something. So Walter is he's constantly criticizing her. He says, like, you know, your tone of voice isn't quite right. You know, the red, you know, I wanted you to wear the red outfit instead of the black because black makes me nervous. And she yells at him. This was the only outfit they had. I guess, did she throw away all of her gear or something?
I get the sense that, I mean, because she doesn't come with very much.
Yeah, she has like an overnight bag.
I'm thinking maybe it's an outfit they had at this dungeon.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But I also, you know, I got the sense that he's also a long-term client of hers.
Yeah.
And by her just like not having the right color clothes, not using the right tone of voice, to me that she was taking out her anger at Peter on Walter.
Yeah.
And frankly, I'm surprised he just didn't get up and say, Red, this is over, walk out the door and demand his money back.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if this is some kind, he's basically bratting her. He's basically saying, you know, the emotional, what he wants is to be a brat to his dominant until she snaps and lashes out at him. That's his deal. That was my interpretation of Walter's deal.
Except at the end, he's still like, this wasn't good.
Well,
you know?
I mean, he paid, and he seemed, that was my interpretation is that his whole thing is being a brat and pushing the dominant until she snaps back at him. And that, see, like, this goes back to what Suzanne was saying about, you know, not wanting to feel anything about her clients. Walter's trying to provoke her into genuine anger so that she lashes out at him. And that's a problem for Suzanne because she doesn't want to have any genuine emotion about this. So now, and like he even, like, you know, she even accuses him of topping her from the bottom, and she says the same thing to Peter later. But we'll get to that. That's sort of in the third act. Yeah.
I guess the problem with that interpretation is, for me, was usually when you play with someone who's being bratty or a bit of a Sam, there's like this smirk quality to them. You know, there's a sort of playfulness edge to it. And I didn't get that from him at all. I got that he was just not happy. And I felt like when she was yelling, there were a couple times I was like, did she come drunk to this dungeon? Because she's like swaying and she's yelling. Her voice is very harsh. And then at the end, she just kind of collapses in this half crying, laughing state. And I don't think she's happy. And so that's what I got worried, is that he he paid her, because as we saw in the scenario when the movies, you know, when we have the flashback to the first scene between Suzanne and Peter, you pay up front. When you go to a pro dom, you don't pay out. Yeah,
you're right. Walter,
you pay up front. And yet he did bow to her, and that could just be the general sort of respect of the positions. But I also got the really strong feeling that she's lost a potential client. You know, they might have seen each other. He doesn't get back there. He was willing to pay more for this. And I think that's gone. I think she's lost it. And because I think part of being a good pro dom is listening to your client, what your client wants and what your client needs, you know. And
but if the client wants genuine anger, not play acted anger, if his whole deal is that he wants to provoke her until she lashes out with him in genuine anger, then that sort of gets into weird areas of consent. And because it's like, I don't want you to, I want you to genuinely be angry with me, not, you know, pretending.
Yeah. And I think that becomes a setup for like not having any sort of regular professional relationship, because you might get away with that once or twice, but would your average pro dom really put up with being played like that for very long? I don't know.
Yeah. And that, I think that's like, that is giving up the emotional control, or at least a facet of control that, you know, she basically, he did get one over her because he did provoke her into snapping at him. And he got what he wanted, and she didn't keep her emotional didn't stay detached from him. Yeah. Now, we talked a bit about Suzanne's past, where she tells Peter about it, and she talks about how, you know, she got the reputation in their teens as being the fast girl in school, and that's had a lasting impact on her. And you suggested that there was some family stuff going on too.
It seemed like a lot to just have like this one incident would be, you know, because I think they hinted at maybe something with her father, and then he moved, and then they joined him later. And also this tension with her mother, just, I don't know, something felt off. Almost like these things were written by someone who doesn't have a lot of experience with those sorts of realities.
Okay.
But yeah, I wanted more about her past, because
now we get a few looks at Peter's past. We see some flashbacks of him, like he has like a speech disability, speech impediment. As a child, we see him, you know, working with these special teachers, these older women. We see him, like, I think we see him as a teen where he's sort of very frustrated, and he's literally banging his head against, well, not like super hard, but banging his head against the wall, because he's so frustrated at being unable to express himself. And even as an adult, there's that bit where he's trying to type a letter and it's just full of spelling errors.
Yeah.
So the implication seems to be that, you know, he imprinted, or whatever you want to call it, on these older women as authority figures to him. What's your view on that argument?
So I think he might have a type of dyslexia, is what I viewed it as, because I went through that too. I had speech therapists and things, because in the 70s, when you got diagnosed with dyslexia, and I'm sure earlier, there's just like a general speech problem. And so you'd go and you'd learn to say things, because we think of dyslexia as being like what you read and what you can spell, but it actually has a lot more to do with how you hear sounds and reproduce sounds in a lot of ways. And it can be both as well. So I got a feeling that's what that was. And if that is supposed to be a hint as to why he wants to be pushed physically and why he wants to please women physically, that would have made a lot more sense to me if Suzanne had been an older pro dom. The fact that she's so much younger than him,
she looks like she's about
doesn't make sense with what he should be looking for.
She's about 20 years younger than him, possibly more.
And I think that could be, I mean, this is an independent movie, so it's not a Hollywood thing, but it's still the stereotypical thing that the pro dom has to be beautiful, young, thin, shapely, whatever, instead of, I think being a pro dom could be a career you could have for many decades, because you would have definitely people like this who might want an older woman, or, as we know, a larger woman. They can be very successful in the pro dom scene. And she just seemed to be a little more in the stereotype, the popular stereotype of what a pro dom should look like. It's that also seemed like a mismatch. Like, so yes, make Susan older.
So, but I mean, like, I guess the idea of that people's involvement, more broadly, that people's involvement in kink comes from pathology, from bad childhood experiences.
Well, I think everything that we're turned on by and what we find erotic, I think it would be false to claim it doesn't have anything to do with our childhoods. I mean, everything that we do is based on the other experiences we've had in our life. They don't have to be negative or positive. I think usually what stands out to me in the kink community is that people are more open about having to have these experiences, because I think in order for you to accept that you have these quote unquote non-traditional sexual interests, you also have to accept what's happened in your past. It's hard to talk about wanting someone to hit you, or you want to hit somebody, if you can't talk about the fact that you masturbated when you were 8, or you saw somebody, you saw a brother naked, or you saw the babysitter and her boyfriend having sex. You have to, whatever these are, I think all these things that happened to us in our past do impact us. And I think because it's so murky and mysterious exactly what happened to Suzanne, we're not sure if it was just this one incident with a boy bad-mouthing her, or I would say bragging. He would probably interpret it as bragging, or something else that happened. And as for Peter, I mean, like you said, we're seeing it affect him at different ages. That makes a little more sense, that you would want, you might be ashamed of it, but you might also want to seek out people. Though again, if that's the case, I don't understand why he's so withholding of himself to his wife. I think that would be like the ideal person to be open with.
He talks about, like, wanting to be held together, I think is the phrase he uses. And he feels like, we see him even as an adult, he's struggling with writing without making spelling errors. And I don't know if that's like a persistent thing with him, or just something that's brought on because he's stressed out about the whole situation with him and Suzanne. I mean, he's became a therapist, and he, I imagine he's, must have some learn to manage it to some degree. But I think it is like he still feels like he wants to be held together by her. So I guess we could segue into the third act here, because so Suzanne's mother has a cancer scare, and this call, I believe, comes right after the Walter scene, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
She gets a call from was her mother or her brother?
It turns out he's her brother. I wasn't sure until near
Yeah.
the end of that whole thing who he was.
Yeah, her brother calls her, said her mother's had was it a cancer scare, or she actually has been diagnosed with cancer?
I think she has cancer because she's worried about her. And one of the comments her mother makes is like, well, don't be worried now. Save it for the stuff that's
Okay.
coming.
Yeah. So Suzanne recruits Peter to drive her upstate or out of the city. And and Peter gets drawn in, meets her mother and her brother. I believe her father's dead at this point.
Yeah.
And there's this very uncomfortable dinner over her mother and with her mother and her brother. And we sort of see the difficult relationship Suzanne has with her mother. So we see that there, and that's when so when he drives her back and they stop at her apartment / office space, art studio space, that's where he sees like she's printed out the pictures from the Villa of the Mysteries, that she's making some kind of art piece off of that. That's also where they start to get more physically intimate. And so like now that he knows about her background and he's seen her family, he actually seems more connected to her. He's like, I think if I remember correctly, he makes the first move into more sexual space with her and her space.
Well, they're talking, and she must say this at least 4 or 5 times in the movie, like, I'll never forget how we met. Like, I can't put it, she has a problem with the fact they met in this pro relationship. And then she says, I rarely kiss anyone. And he wants to kiss her. So they kiss, and, then she again is like, I can't get over that. Just I can't get over how, other stuff. And then suddenly they're on the couch and they're making out. And he says, this is just, I laughed a little bit the first time. He's like, I want to be inside of you. And I'm like, really? Do people really say this? I'm like, okay. It's kind of a blatant way to say it. And she's like, no. And so of course he stops, because when she says no, he stops. But then she goes in the bathroom, she comes out with her shirt undone and just like comes over him and
Yeah. That's the only time we see her nude, I believe.
Yeah. And I'm just like, stop giving these confusing signals. And I don't know what's going on there, but eventually they just stop. And by the next time they meet, he's quite worked up and very upset.
Yeah, he's on the brink of, this is a whole different scene. They're meeting in a restaurant or something.
Yeah.
He looks like he's on the brink of complete panic. And that, he almost yells, I don't want to lose you. And, and she says, I can't hold you together. And that's, and I guess that's just the final statement that they can't, that she admits that I can't do that. I can't, so that's, so I believe we have a final scene of Peter, who's gone up to join his wife and their daughter in the country. And Peter talks to his wife about like, this is the scene that makes me think their marriage is kind of stale. They don't have much sexual interest in each other.
Yeah, this is where she basically says, you want to be private. You don't even trust, basically you don't trust me.
Yeah.
And
she, and he basically, he apologizes and admits that he's been hurtful towards her. And it's also like, their daughter is out like on a paddleboard or something. And it's sort of like, they're on the brink of the empty nest syndrome. Almost, it's like the only thing they really have connecting themselves anymore is their daughter, and she's on the brink of adulthood. So then we get, the final scene is them talking on the phone. And what was the visual of that? It was like,
I think the screen was just black. It was really,
but it's her like saying she's gone back to the dungeon And he says, I saw, it calls her up and says, I saw you in a magazine. And she says she's only there part-time, once a week or something.
Yeah.
And it ends on this very ambiguous note of whether they're going to see each other again, whether, so I guess the big question is, could they have had a relationship, outside of the dungeon?
I don't know. And I don't know primarily, I would say 70% of that is on Suzanne's character.
Mm.
Because I think eventually his issues of keeping parts of himself from the people he should be intimate with might have reared up in a relationship. Because I imagine he was more open with his wife. He would have had to have been at some point for her to be like, oh, you're seeing these other people. It hurts me, but you're seeing these other people. And he feels like he can just say, yeah, this pro dom I was seeing, I'm now seeing her. So they have that level of comfort. So I think eventually that might have happened with Suzanne, but Suzanne was nowhere near, in terms of her own self-development, to having a relationship. She is like so far away from Terry in that dungeon, who's confident and having fun and wants to be there. She is so far from Terry that I think he would have had a much better shot with Terry.
Yeah.
In terms of two human beings, doing this as part of their relationship, which is literally just a part of the relationship. To the degree to which it's part of the relationship varies for everyone. But I just don't know. I think she was too distant. She had too many things she hadn't worked through.
Yeah.
And I also think that maybe, that one instance where she accuses him of trying to be her therapist, I think that could have also been a pattern they might have fallen into, where he kind of, the roles got reversed and he was kind of functioning as her character. And I don't think that's what he wanted.
That was his I think he has a habit of that a bit, and, ended up trying to analyze her. I think you're right that Suzanne is, maybe that's Peter's problem, is that Suzanne has this remoteness that he's drawn to, and Terry is just like, I'm here. You don't have to climb over rocks to get to me. I'm just here. And without that climbing over rocks part, there's no attraction for Peter.
Yeah, because maybe he felt like he didn't have to do enough to impress her or something.
And it's you see, I guess what I liked so much about this movie is that at least it treats this seriously as a psychological, that there is a real connection here, but it's a very delicate one. Like, again, going back to Linderman's book, Dominatrix, Danielle J. Lindemann, she talks about how the pro-doms have this very delicate balance of being both the image of the leather-clad ogress of the nursery, commanding bitch, but at the same time being empathetic, being connected, walking this fine line of doing what, giving the client what they want, but not being like a complete puppet of them, and being like an authority, being like, I am a professional, I have skills, I am an artist, I know, I'm not just like a wind-up toy you can give me a script and I'll say it. And so I think that Suzanne couldn't quite manage that balancing act. Her sense of boundaries are always in flux, moving back and forth, even with people outside. So she wants that bit where Peter was like kissing up her leg all the way up to her groin. And it's like it's almost like her kink is setting that boundary, being able to change that boundary anytime she wanted. And
that doesn't work in a real life relationship.
Yeah.
You need, both people have to give and take. There has to be compromises on both sides, or you both have to be in alignment. And Yeah, I think Peter probably I think Peter needs to focus on his marriage, and maybe, who knows, his wife might learn to like some of the stuff that he would just be
Maybe.
more open with her, or
Yeah.
at the least, be like, hey, well, why don't you actually, I would like to meet your whatever, and we can talk this through.
Yeah. Like,
but Suzanne needs a lot of help.
yeah. Like Suzanne, like I think that maybe could have been a bigger thing, because like I can see that, like I believe her name was Pat, Peter's wife. Pat was like, she accepts the idea that he goes and sees prodoms, but the idea that he's going to see somebody outside of a professional context, to me, that's a whole different degree of emotional connection and intimacy. And
Yeah.
she might have said something more about that than just sort of like taking it. Like, here's another question. Can Peter or Suzanne change?
I think that, what do they call it? Your love map.
Yeah.
I think changing your love map is exceedingly difficult, because I think those things are set when you're fairly young and they're part of your personality. So you would, first of all, have to recognize what you want to change and be willing to do a lot of work for it. And there are things I would improve about both of them. For Peter, I would improve, like, stop being so afraid. Like, stop being so afraid of this. You have a wife right there. For God's sakes, try to talk to her. She feels like you're not open with her. You're being so private. Just try to open up, see what happens. And for Suzanne, it's like, you need to accept that some of these things are really part of you. It's not like a latex dress that you're putting on and taking off. These things actually affect you. And for whatever reason.
So maybe the intimacy she creates isn't quite so fake.
Yeah, well, I think it taps into things that she might want, but which scare her.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, she went back to the dungeon. If only part-time. So I like this. Like I said, I like this film, maybe not because it may in a way because it doesn't show an ideal kink relationship. It shows a real kink relationship. And that I can see this happening in real life, that people who have that connection in the sealed world of the dungeon, but can't connect outside of it. And that's why I like it as a honest treatment of a relationship. It's very human, in my opinion. How about you?
I like it more after talking to you about it, but I still can't. It still kind of makes me sad. So this would not be a movie I would put on to enjoy.
Okay.
But yeah, they seem like, if we get a little deeper into some of the issues, they seem like very real people with real problems. And I did really appreciate that this did not fall into some of the tropes about prodoms.
Yes.
It's almost always a prodom movie, which is either it's silly, or someone's got to get killed or kidnapped, or there's a robbery or some sort of crime. There's no crime here. No one's getting killed. There's nothing, illegal going on. No one's getting raped. I think the main actor, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I've seen him in many, many things.
Yeah.
Her, I haven't.
Yeah.
I didn't recognize her from anything. And I think maybe that might also be the difference in the emotional quality I'm getting from them, is I'm getting more from him, and maybe that reflects his skills as an actor, but it could also just be how the director and the writer designed the characters, that she's more closed off and aloof and everything. But I would recommend, if people haven't seen this, they see it, just don't think this is what your relationship should be like, because that's not what this movie is saying.
Well, I think maybe that, like, I've been I researched this stuff, and one of the issues that come up is representation. Is this a good representation of, a queer person or a kinky person or a kinky relationship? Is it good? Probably not. Is it honest? And is there psychological realism to it? Yes, there is. And I think it deserves it respects the humanity of the characters and in all their flaws.
Mhm.
And that's why I appreciate, I think it's one of the more humane and thoughtful treatments of a kink relationship and a female dominant, male submissive relationship.
Yeah.
I think that's a wrap.